When we're sewing together and then pressing the seams open, the rule is always press toward the darker side. And what that means is that this seam allowance right here is folded toward the darker side, so that when everything is laying down, you have the white, which is a little bit more see-through, without a dark piece of fabric under it, so you can't see the seam allowances there. That's a general rule, and 90% of the time that's what you do. You press toward the darker side. So if you look at this first seam is pressed toward the darker of those two fabrics. This seam is pressed toward the darker of these fabrics. But every once in a while, you come up to a situation where if things are pressed toward the darker side, it's not going to work out so well. And this is one of those situations. So let's talk about that. We need to sew those two together. Usually what you're trying to do when you butt up seams and you're trying to match points and get really good points is you have this little ledge right here. And what happens if they're both pointing toward the same side, you don't have any ledge to push them up against each other. Here, what I can do is I can take this one that's pointing this way, this one that's pointing this way, because I didn't press it toward the darker side, and I can push those up really close together so that they're just locked in together. So they're locked in and they're not going to move. When I do that, press that in really close together, then sew it, I'm going to end up with really nice points. When that comes out and I press that open, now look at, they come pretty close to the same, to a nice even point. Instead of it being a point, that's like not quite, instead of meeting at the top, they're like a little bit off kilter one way or the other. That happens when you get it even, when you have those two ledges really close, really locked in together. And so that's what we're going to do with like I said, every once in a while. Now, what I did was originally I didn't realize that was going to happen, and I pressed them all toward the darker side. As soon as I figured that out, I went and repressed them, because it's more important to me. See, you can see this little, I don't know if you can see it, but I can see this little ledge, the little seam allowance poking through the white on the front. It's just going to be there. I'd rather have that here right now and have a really nice point that comes to a nice point. So most of the time you press toward the darker fabric, sometimes you don't.